Welcome to the OTech Talks podcast, where it's all about working on technologies. You will hear the latest tech information, and your host, Kashif Manzoor, brings together product overviews, how-tos, best practices, tips and tricks, and troubleshooting techniques.
Welcome to Open Tech Talks podcast. Today with me, Ian Harris from Pulse Podcasts. Welcome Ian to the Open Tech Talks.
Hi, Kashif. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me to share your knowledge and tips with the audience. As you're the founder of Pulse Podcasts, and the name shows, or name states, you have the expertise in the podcast. So if you can brief the audience that what you do and how you can support the podcasters
Absolutely.
with your.
So we, as you know, as a podcaster yourself, the listeners to podcasts are growing all the time. So we're expecting that in 2024, there'll be 500 million global listeners to podcasts across the planet, which is a substantial amount. There's only about 2 billion email users on the planet. So the fact that we now have up to 500 million listeners of podcasts is quite a substantial audience out there. And the great thing about podcasts is that it allows you to reach a very small niche of people. So if you're interested in a very specific topic, then you can find a podcast on that particular topic. You can delve into it. You can stay interested for a while. You could then move on to another topic, which is fine. But it covers so many different areas that it allows you to reach a particular niche audience and deliver to them content that they care about, that they want to spend time listening to. Now, there's plenty of content on the internet to read, but the challenge is keeping up with it. And so if you're spending time commuting or in a car, it's a great way of actually keeping up with a business area or even a hobby that you're interested in. And even in the US, we're finding that about 33% of all Americans listened to a podcast last month. So it's gone from being a kind of niche thing to being a very widely accepted way of reaching an audience. So great, you're running a business, you're doing marketing, you're getting content out there, you're writing a blog perhaps, or maybe you've got an email newsletter. You're growing your audience, you're growing your brand by trying to reach people using words and web pages and blogs and so on. That's great, and obviously still very important in today's internet world. But the difficulty is that people tend to scan text very quickly. So you might read a headline, you might read a few words of an article, and that's kind of it. It'd be really great for your brand is if they could spend more time with it, and not just talking about 10 seconds reading a headline, but in fact listening to something for 10 minutes or 30 minutes. And so podcasting has always been a great way of reaching your audience, but the difficulty with podcasts is that, as you know, it takes time. You have to write a script of the thing you care about, make sure the script is right, and then record it physically using microphones and humans. And then someone has to edit that to take all the bits out that don't kind of make sense. Or when even as we're talking now, stringing words together is hard. Even just reading a script is hard. And so that takes time. And then you might want to put some music with it and make sure that it's normalized and edit and the actual mix sounds good, and then write a description for it and then upload it. The whole thing actually is quite time consuming. And as a professional brand, if you care about the sound of your podcast, then you might get a voiceover artist to actually record it, with a good sounding voice. So this all prevents you really from taking that step into using podcasts as a medium to reach your audience. And so as in several roles I've been working with AI to help manipulate words and to create words and audio recordings and so on. And it seemed to me that there was an opportunity here to help people that really had great content already and turn it into a podcast. And so that's what we've created with this company now. So if you have a newsletter that comes out, let's say you have a daily newsletter of news topics about your industry, and someone sits there and curates that newsletter. They research articles, they put it together, they put little descriptions of the articles, and every day you send out a newsletter to your audience. And your audience enjoys catching up with your newsletter, finding out what's happening about your product and so on. So what we do is we take that newsletter or your blog content, and we use AI to repurpose that content and turn it into a script. And then
Okay.
we re-edit that script and make it flow better from beginning to end. So just like a human would do in terms of, okay, we've got an article about this and this. Let's put those two together and let's refer to something we talked about at the beginning at the end of it, so it kind of ties back together. Try and group it together with themes. We create an intro and an outro to the podcast itself, and then we use a very advanced AI voice to actually create an audio recording of that script. And then we take that recording and we add music to it, and we mix the music in, we fade it in, we fade it out at the end, and we normalize all the audio. And then we look at the script of the podcast and create a description that's appropriate for the podcast episode itself, and create a title based on what's in the content. And then we upload it all automatically to a distribution mechanism for podcasts, and out it goes into the world. And so now we can create podcasts that actually sound really good, really engaging, that sound professional, but are actually entirely created by an AI behind the scenes that does all the hard work of taking that content and making it appropriate for audio. So I think we're in a very exciting time for podcasts, because now we can get right down and reduce the price considerably from having humans involved and voiceover artists and so on, to be able to do it for just an incremental cost in terms of what you're actually doing to produce the content in the first place.
Okay. Okay, great stuff from that angle. So from taking a newsletter to producing it, is it all automated with AI, or is there some human intervention?
Yeah, it's completely automated. So in the case of podcasts that are based on news and kind of current information and what's happening, we can do that completely in a completely automated fashion. So we actually have an API into these newsletter providers, and we grab the latest copy of the newsletter and we completely process it from scratch. Now, some companies, some local government areas, for example, that we work with, are a little more particular about the words you might use and the phrases that are used and so on. And so we have an extra step for some customers where we take the initial draft script and we send it to them for reviewing as humans to make sure they're okay with the wording, and if there isn't something that we don't know about that we shouldn't be talking about. And so they can edit it and change that at that point. But aside from that particular instance, we don't need to have humans involved in that process at all. Now, you might think, okay, but now a robot's reading my podcast. What's that going to sound like? Actually, it sounds really, really good. In fact, it sounds better than me trying to string sentences together here. The voiceover artists that create the podcast we listen to, so we recorded these voiceover artists and then we fed them into an AI engine to turn them into it gives us the ability to recreate the way speech sounds much more normally. We kind of put pauses in between things. When we want to emphasize things, we get excited about stuff. And then we think, well, we kind of pause and we change our intonation. So this engine now gives us the ability to inject all that into the sense of the script that we're talking about. And even when we're talking about businesses and what's happening in the world, we still feel a sense of excitement, and we feel a sense of trepidation, and all these kind of emotions are important to how it sounds as you're listening to something. If you're listening to a robot that's just speaking in a kind of even up and down kind of, or the same intonation, the way we kind of pitch our voice over a sentence. If we do that same pitch over and over again, our brains kind of have a really good memory for that intonation, because it indicates to us the sense of emotion and feeling that we describe words with. If we repeat that, then it sounds very robotic, even if the actual recording was perfect. And so this engine allows us to make sure that the whole flow of entire paragraphs make it feel very natural and like you're just listening to someone who was reading the script.
Okay, and how long it took you guys to develop this product?
Yeah, so we've been developing this for about 6 months now, and we started out with something that was okay, but it didn't sound very very professional, didn't sound very good. But with the latest engines, we're now at a point where it's so believable that you kind of forget. Every now and then the AI does make a mistake about how to pronounce particular words occasionally. And it's only then where you go, oh, that's right. Actually, this is not real at all. It's actually so convincing that it feels like you're genuinely listening to a human. And some of our listeners, if they feel a kind of affinity to our kind of created voices. We have a podcast we do each morning we live in Sydney, Australia. And in Sydney, we have a little podcast that runs for about 3 minutes, and we take the train the train information, what's happening on the trains. If you're taking trains that morning, we take the weather and we look at the traffic situation in Sydney. And again, we generate an entire podcast of 3 or 4 minutes. And it's available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Alexa if you have the flash news briefing. And we have people that feel like they know this character because it's a kind of comedic kind of, it's a very humorous kind of 3.5 minutes. And they feel like they kind of know this character that talks to them every morning about what's happening on the roads. So it really is close now to not quite. It's not intended to fool people, but it's certainly a very listenable, pleasant, understandable experience. You feel like you're getting the same information out, but now we can do that. That enables our clients can do it at a much lower cost than actually having to get a human up in the morning at 6 o'clock to actually record this every day. Now we can put it out automatically and still have the same sort of effect.
Okay, and if may I ask for more technically, so how you start developing it? I mean, did you use any open source proprietary technology, if you're aware about it, or how did you start it? I mean, you're one man. Did you code it yourself? Did you hire a team?
Yeah, so we've got a team of developers that pull this together.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 aspects to it. There's all the data manipulation. So when we're talking
Mm-hmm.
to back-end APIs for newsletters and for blog posts, so we have some experts in pulling stuff out of APIs and then pulling it into our database. Once we've got all that
Okay.
information, then we have people that have been good at taking that information and formatting it in a way so that the AI, and we use a bunch of different engines, large language models. So we use GPT-4, we use Claude, we use a bunch of other ones depending on the particular niche area that's appropriate. We've discovered that some engines are good at some things, some are good at more
Right.
creative things, some are good at business things, and so matching the engine is obviously part of that challenge. And then we spent a long time working on the prompts to get the AI engines to do exactly what we want, because we found that sometimes they would do things that don't sound very human-like, and so generating that initial script is actually part of that magic. Because if you can create a good script, then the engine that voices it can render it really nicely because it's the way a kind of human would speak. But for example, if you had a really long sentence, it's really hard to make that sound good. No matter, even if you're a human, reading a long sentence is really hard. And inserting words in particular orders that humans wouldn't put it like that kind of makes it difficult. And so that's why we have this process of we create a draft script and we actually get it to completely rewrite the script to make it sound much more natural, have better flow, link things together, because humans love kind of linking things back to where they heard from something at the start. And then giving it a whole character to it. Some of our podcasts are humorous. Some of it are kind of straight up and serious. Some of it are kind of business podcasts, and some of them, the ones we do for councils, for example, local government areas. They want a sense of fun and enjoyment, but not so not too serious, but not kind of frivolous either. So kind of finding that tone is a really interesting challenge to get those AI engines working the right way. So some engines are very good at very serious business conversations, great, and some are much better at kind of humorous, injecting a kind of frivolity into the language itself. And so that was the big challenge for the developers, to try and get those prompts working with the engines right. And then finally, the biggest challenge, of course, is now we've got a bunch of audio files. So we've got some audio files with the voice, and we've got music. So we license music from a couple of different music providers, and then we need to mix that music with the voice itself. So we join all the voice together because they all come in little snippets. Have to join that all together, then normalize the actual recording so it is the right level. Then we take the music and normalize that as well. Then we mix it all together. Then we normalize it all again. And so a lot of work went into the actual manipulation of the audio, because it's half the battle to generate a voice. But it's really nice if there's, in our case, we often do intros with music over the front, or there might be music running through the whole show itself. So the music comes in and then it loops in a way so that it sounds seamless until it gets to the end, then it closes off at the end. And those fade ins and fade outs, that aspect of manipulating the audio were a particular challenge as well. But now we're at a point where it sounds pretty good now. So I'm really, really proud of the way that recording sounds. And so we'll be able to point your listeners at some of the podcasts so they can hear what is possible now with AI voice and with automated mixing and descriptions and so on, so they can see that effect for themselves.
And do the listeners knows that the AI is the voice is AI speaking behind the
Yeah,
scene?
we do make it clear that it's an
Mhm.
AI voice that are actually rendering the audio. But to be honest, unless you go and kind of research it and find out, look in the descriptions and see the credits and so on, it's actually it's really hard to tell now. Is it a human, or is it just a really good sounding voiceover artist? So it's very hard to tell at this point if you don't actually know in advance. So we make it clear that that's what we do.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Okay. Okay. So now, as you develop, you spend maybe 6 months large. So if someone is starting a new venture into using AI and to develop some product, and you're being a first-hand experience from last 6 months, so what could be your suggestions or tips for him
Oh,
being?
that's a good question. That's a good question. So I think the exciting thing about the AI arena at the moment is there's just so much change that is happening every day. Every day something new happens, and
Mhm,
there's new
mhm,
abilities that are coming out almost every day. And so part of the
mhm,
challenge is not just getting familiar with the technology, but keeping up
mhm,
with how fast everything is changing. So
mhm,
we developed all our stuff against one particular AI engine, and then we found that there was
mhm,
another one that had just come out, and we're like, oh, that's much
mhm,
better. We'll have to change everything.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
we then decided we put a buffer in between us and the engine. So we said,
mhm,
so we described what we wanted, and then we put kind of like a plug-in infrastructure, like a driver that talks to a particular different AI engine. And that meant that
mhm,
as the engines changed, we could slot them in and out without having to change the rest
mhm,
of our
mhm,
back-end infrastructure. So that made a big
mhm,
difference for us. So expecting change, it's going to change
mhm,
a lot.
mhm,
And you really do have to have a bit of an imagination when you're using AI engines, either for text or speech rendering. Um, the challenge is that they don't quite think the way that we do, and so as you're trying to get it to do something, to kind of coax it into doing things a certain way, like they
mhm,
certainly get obsessed. If you say things in the prompt, it kind of gets it stuck in its head, and it's almost as if that's all it can think about. So you kind of have to mention
mhm,
things subtly and mention
mhm,
things in terms of what you want to have in a positive sense. If you say
mhm,
you really don't want something to happen, then it's kind of like it's got it in its head and it can't get it out of its head, and it starts doing the thing that you don't want
mhm,
it to do. So we've learned
mhm,
a lot about prompt engineering as well, in terms of how we can
mhm,
coax it into getting the right kind of we say frame of mind. It doesn't have a mind, of course, but it feels like it. It feels like
mhm,
you're trying to convince it that this is this sort of answer that you want, and this is how we have to
mhm,
describe it in a way that that enables us to get that right answer. And so, spending
mhm,
time on those prompts, I mean, they're kind of describing it as prompt engineering, and it's not. I don't think it's a
mhm,
real science yet, but it certainly is. It certainly does take
mhm,
some art and some experimentation and some creativity in order to try a bunch of things until you get the
mhm.
outcome that you want. So
Okay.
change, experimentation, being flexible, expecting
Mhm,
that, coping with that change. Certainly, some
mhm.
of the things as you get into AI that you need to experiment with.
Okay. And how did you validate this idea that yes, there's a market demand, and then this product will fit into it?
Yeah, good question. We wrote to all the local councils in Australia and said,
Mm-hmm.
you guys, we found all the ones that actually put newsletters out, and we said, you guys
Mm-hmm.
are writing newsletters and spending all this time getting information out to your constituents. What would it be like if we took that and we turned that into a podcast? And here's what the podcast would sound like.
Mm-hmm.
And once we started getting responses from them saying, actually, that sounds like a great idea, we knew
Mm-hmm.
we were starting to be onto something. So we started there, and now we've started to talk to businesses. So I was chatting
Mm-hmm.
to some friends that we were chatting online on an online discussion group. And they were asking
Mm-hmm.
about what I did, and I explained our concept. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
guys said, that sounds great, because I read this newsletter every day for my industry, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't have much time to read it all. Actually, I'd love to be able to keep up with it, but I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
commute time. If only it was
Mm-hmm.
available as a podcast. And so
Mm-hmm.
I got my friend to send me a link to the newsletter, and I tracked down the guys that were actually writing the newsletter. And
Mm-hmm.
from that, we had a discussion about how we could help them with their newsletter to create a podcast. We did some demos, and now we're creating a podcast for their business on a daily basis, all completely automatically, which is amazing. So, we really did have to talk to customers, and it did take a bit of explaining, because this is a very new concept where we're really creating something out of nothing and enabling them to step in an area there. Most people really would love to have a podcast to go with their business. They know the reach, they know it engages people. They know people spend 30 minutes with their brand. That's unheard of compared to reading a few headlines for 10 seconds. Everyone would love a podcast, but up until this point, it really has been way too expensive to spend the time and effort and money to do that. The return is just not there. But if you can do it for just a few $100s a month, all of a sudden it's like, well, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to get enough SEO juice from all the directories to be worth that easily. That's crazy. I should totally be doing a podcast. And so now we're starting to get some traction as we're starting to explain what this means and how you can actually have your own podcast for something that seems much more reasonable than what was possible in the past.
Okay. And how do you market this? How did you start getting customers?
So we have experimented with a bunch of different ways of getting the word out. So we've done Google ads, we've done Reddit ads, we've done Facebook ads. But what has been most effective actually has been direct marketing to contacts that we think would be interested in this particular service. And so it's one of those things that advertising is hard, because it's so new and kind of foreign that it's difficult to. If you're selling, if you want to buy a fridge and you see an ad for a fridge, no problems. But if you don't know that you even need a fridge, it's very hard when you see a fridge to know that you want it. And so that's the challenge with this very new AI technology, in that once you explain it in terms of what the value is, of course that makes perfect sense. But getting that over that barrier has been a challenge for sure.
Okay, and how is it going from commercially? Because
Good.
From developing to till now, is it start getting money or still investing it, or how is it?
Yes, we have customers on board. We are generating real podcasts. We have paying customers that are paying money to see their amazing podcasts out in the world. We're super excited about that. But it is the beginning of our journey, and we'd love to have more people take on this opportunity to get their message out.
Okay, and if you want to leave one message for anyone who's starting such a venture to develop their own product or starting some startup, what could be that?
I think the challenge. I'm a technology person. I love building things. I love creating things, and I know many technology people feel the same. There's a joy in that creation of something out of nothing. There's a great joy in that. I love it. It's great. And once I'm kind of solved the technology problems, I want to get onto the next technology challenge to solve. That's the fun part of it for me. And I think the thing I need to keep remembering with all these ideas is that these technology problems often devolve into a marketing problem at the end of the day. Lots of fast people can solve the technology problem for you or with you, but once you've done that, the challenge is, if you've forgotten about the marketing problem along the way, then it's very difficult to then go, okay, well, I've got this cool thing, but how do I get people to know about it? And so I think that for us, being in touch with the customers and getting feedback with them all the way along on this particular product that I've done seems to be the right answer in terms of making sure it's headed in the direction that customers actually care about. I think that's the key takeaway for me.
And now maybe let's go back to one more question. Before 6 months or so, what Ian was doing?
Running an engineering team, developing software for broadcasters. So in a commercial environment. And before that, I was helping out with media organizations and broadcasters. So I've always been involved in media things and creating streaming platforms and web platforms and SaaS platforms and technology backends and infrastructure in order to be able to get media from one place to another, captions and video and audio. So I've always been involved in this kind of world. And now it's exciting to take something that's a little more specific and a little more niche and see that kind of head out into the world itself.
So, all right. So how did you got an idea that this I need to do it?
So I was in one of the companies I was working in. I was working a lot with AI. So we were doing captioning, so taking meetings online and turning it into words that deaf and hard of hearing people could read and participate in meetings, and also university lectures, so they could go to a university lecture and if they were deaf, be able to understand what was happening in the lecture and participate. So we were spending a lot of time taking voice and turning it into text, and then doing audio description for videos as well. So, which means that if you are blind or poorly sighted, being able to get a description in an audio sense of what's happening on the screen as you're watching something. And so we're spending a lot of time in this area of AI and text and audio, and so we're very immersed in. And this was a couple of years ago now, really in the early days. It seems like early days, only 2 years ago, but it's the early days of AI engines really starting to be useful. And it was during this time I was like, this is really interesting, and it was I loved the service of what we were doing and providing for people. But it seemed to me that there was another opportunity where if we could create something that sounded good enough. And initially I was talking about thinking about this audio description idea. Because we did do audio description on these videos, but they were using we call it a synthetic voice. But back then, synthetic voices were really robotic, terrible sounding. But the challenge for our customers at that point was that if you went from a synthetic voice to a human voiceover artist, it was thousands of dollars difference in the cost. And so that actually prevented them from doing anything at all. They didn't like the synthetic voice, but they couldn't really afford the human actually voicing it nicely. And so they didn't do it at all. So this seemed like a missed opportunity for me. And whilst we haven't done any audio description work for Pulse Podcasts, it does seem like this is the next step of saying, okay, we've got this text. Let's create it. Let's turn it into beautiful audio where the voiceover artist, the artificial voiceover artist, sounds as good as a human now. And so being able to achieve that, I think, is a great advantage.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for joining. So if you want to leave, someone want to reach out to you to get to know about you, your product, how they can reach out.
Yeah, have a look at our website, www.pulsepodcasts.com. And we'll send some links in for your show notes as well. They can listen to some of the podcasts and hear how they sound, and hopefully get excited as we are about what we're doing. Thanks so much for having us on the show, Kashif. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you so much for joining. And I like your idea of using the latest technology to solve some problem. And I think you rightly said all those organizations or departments are different. They may, there is a requirement that they don't need to do it actually human to come on board and do all the stuff which you are helping them to do it with podcast release. Thank you so much. Wonderful
Absolutely.
work.
Thanks for having us, and hope your listeners enjoyed the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the OTech Talks podcast, and be part of Tech Talks at otechtalks.tv. It's a turf to share ideas, insights, and